Hello and welcome to the LoveThat podcast. I'm Mark, and here with me are my colleagues Charli and Marcio.
Hi.
Hello.
This podcast is about all things creative.
Specifically the subjects of design, digital and video.
With other stuff thrown into the mix. As well as being able to listen to us, you'll also be able to see us and what we're getting up to on our YouTube channel.
We're currently on our podcast set, which has kindly been provided to us by the University of Portsmouth.
With a big thanks to the CCI department who are helping us to film and record this series.
It's my episode today.
It's all about you.
Yeah. Talking about how to provoke emotion in the video world and what tools and techniques as video guys use to pull out that emotive kind of feel, whether it's sadness, happiness, anger. So yeah, what do you want to know?
Well, I think the video one has the reputation of being the easiest ones to influencing emotion, but I think at the same time, because it has to include music, sound, color, it can also be the most complicated to actually get the effect that you want.
I think every kind of asset that you put into the final cut needs to work together to create that feeling. You can do so much with color or cut techniques or angles and music, but separately you can create separate bits, but if they're not gelling together, it can confuse the hell out of your brain to what you're actually watching or what you're meant to be feeling.
Yeah.
For instance, if you're watching an action film, you've got like the really quick pace. If you've got like a bit of plinky plonky music going along with that.
That's the technical term,
Yeah,
right? Plinky plonky.
Plinky plonky. Great British Bake Off kind of.
Yeah.
Love that show.
Then it's hard to obviously get across that raw kind of emotion and feel.
I think a really good example of that is, and Marcio, you might remember this, so just a small film, Justice League, but we all saw the original, and then there was the additional cut. There are particular scenes within both versions that have very different music tracks, and there's a particular one for its cinematic view where Aquaman is walking into the sea. In one cut, it has a very rocky tune. And then in the second edition, when they brought it back out, completely different tune, and it completely changes the feel of that particular scene.
Yeah, I actually prefer the original. If we're talking about that.
I mean, I haven't seen this, so I can't really say. But I mean, from what you're telling me, it's like the Rocky version of it. For me, I would portray it as he's going into the sea to cause some drama, some action. In terms of the actual version they used, how was it different in terms of music style?
It was.
And what was the message they were trying to get
Exactly.
from it?
I think that to me it felt a little bit weird, because to me the message should be the same. He's still doing the same. Two directors. That's why they have two different versions, and the soundtrack choices are different. But in that particular one, he's just going to the sea, throwing the bottle. He's drinking, throwing the bottle, and just going to the sea. He doesn't care about anything. He's having a little bit of a stroke, just going to the sea. So the rock one is like the rebel, kind of angsty, like he doesn't care. Yeah. And then the song that was shown is more.
It's somber, isn't it?
It's somber. It's a little
sad.
bit more. It's kind of sad. It's saying that it's still rebel, but more the sad side of it. Like he's trying to recognize.
He's got some kind of issues.
He has some suffering inside. I think is what they're trying to go for.
It just didn't have the same energy.
It doesn't have the same energy, really especially after everyone's seen the first one.
Yeah.
But I think that's what is interesting is how do you make those decisions of that action pack with the colors and the sound. What does it say that in our brain is going to be action pack, or that music is going to be, it's going to be sad, it's going to be angsty, it's going to be like, how do you decide?
Preempt
Yeah, how do you
I
make
think-
those choices?
I think a lot of it is to do with the build up in the scene. So obviously with the action, you have a lot of quick cuts, you have some building music that is constantly going. And at the end of it, if you feel your heartbeat, you're kind of engrossed, you're immersed into the film because your heart rate's gone up from like 60 to like 90 just from watching this scene. In terms of the emotion, cuts are slower. They want you to prolong what you're seeing on the screen. The music track is subdued. It's kind of what you would experience listening to the radio, listening to an Adele music track. That kind of emotion matches what's on the screen and causes you to then have the opposite reaction where, I mean, I'm one for crying watching a movie, and I'm not afraid to admit it because everyone needs a good cry now and again.
Everyone needs a good cry.
But it has that reaction, and I think a lot of these situations is how can you create something on screen that replicates real life, certain scenarios, and it's about getting almost, some of it is fly on the wall. You're not part of it, but you're watching something unfold.
More voyeuristic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about observation. I think what's really interesting is obviously when you talk about video emotion, we all immediately go to film and movies, but that's not what we do.
Yeah.
What we do is we create the visual story to marketing narratives or campaign objectives that are around. It could be behaviour change, it could be about a launch, it could be about product functionality, it can be anything. So let's take behaviour change, for instance, because we work with a lot of clients that are working to make things better for their customers, for their communities. How do you approach those types of products so that you still get that essence from, say, filmmaking, but into those more promotional pieces, or just what people wouldn't necessarily think of at the top of their head from a film and emotion?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is researching into the company you're working for. Obviously seeing their values, seeing what they're about, seeing what initiatives they have or community kind of involvement they have. Go onto their social pages, see what the interaction is like with their customers, kind of really dive into what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how they want to come across. So they would give us a brief, and they would say, for instance, one of our clients was wanting to create a film on homelessness for a big campaign they were doing. They're basically a social housing company, and they wanted to get across the fact that there's more people living in homelessness than you actually think, and they're doing what they can to help people come out of that and into social housing to kind of restart their life. And the way they wrote the brief was quite simple in the terms of, we want it to be emotive. And to do that, you had to kind of figure out what is the issue at the moment. Obviously, you can show homelessness, you can show someone living on a street, rough, but is that every kind of homelessness
is it the
there is?
authentic kind of picture?
Exactly, because there's so many different kinds of it, and we had to kind of figure out how we wanted to get this across. And we thought, obviously we could show that, but why not show something a bit closer to home? Why not show the people that are homeless that don't want to be associated that way? So
the hidden homeless.
they're hidden homeless. They're couch surfing on their friends' sofas. They're sleeping in cars. They're doing everything they can not to be on the street. And most of them will have a job, but it's not enough to afford a house, to afford enough food, and some of them even have like children that they have to take care of as well. So we just wanted to kind of flip it on its head and make it more realistic, and to interact with the audience in a way that people would think, oh, that could potentially be me. And the more people relate to it, the more emotive it will feel, and the more emotion it will come across. And And we had some really good feedback because we did two case studies. We did a single mum who had to go to work. She had 2 kids. She was living in a B&B. And then we had a man who had a dog, and he was kind of couch surfing between his friends. If he couldn't find a friend to sleep at, he had to sleep on the bus, because obviously the buses run, especially in London, the buses run all night. So we wanted to get that across. We wanted to show those 2 different scenarios, and we had really good feedback from the client. They showed it at their company day, which is basically where they get everyone into a room and kind of rile them up to produce their best work and give them kind of goals to do and objectives to do for the rest of the year. And the feedback was there wasn't one dry eye in the house after watching that, and hearing that back was like, we did it, we smashed it. That's what we wanted to do.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's that authentic emotion. It's not, whilst you're wanting people to empathise with the situation and then hopefully act and raise awareness that there are tools and things out there, it's that authentic emotion. It's not forced, it's not set up as such. So how do you kind of tread that line? Like, it's probably like when you get to editing and the way you shoot things, but how do you tread that line between, say you're doing something that needs to feel like you're following someone's everyday life, how do you make it feel authentic but still get the content in a way that we're all used to seeing and that feels true and professionally cut?
Yeah. So it's a big process. I mean, from start to end, you're looking at that project specifically was about 3 months worth of work. So we had to develop a concept initially. We had to come up with the look and feel. So obviously we knew it was going to be emotive. So how can we show that using certain camera angles? How can we change the color grades to make it come across a certain way and feel? And then a big one was finding the right music track as well that we needed to basically cover the whole piece, because this was a piece without dialogue. This was literally...
Oh, so there wasn't even any dialogue on the top of it? Oh,
No,
wow.
no.
So it was just almost like silent picture, but with music.
Obviously, you could follow the story through the way that they were living, and you were intrigued to know what's the story here. It was only revealed at the end that they were actually homeless.
Oh, wow. How do you even storyboard something like that when you know you've not got script to rely on to fill in the gaps? How do you go about figuring out what to shoot to tell that story?
So it is obviously coming up with that story. I mean, we screenplay, even if there's not any dialogue, we still come up with a screenplay, which is basically a play-by-play of how it's going to look. We think about the shots, the opening shots, going into close-ups, going into the detail of how long we're going to hold on a certain shot, and then how it's going to cut into the next shot.
Yeah, because I remember, I think in that one you had little camera shots going over the phones, and then you have messages coming up, so you can have a little exposition going forward. Because there was no dialogue, the camera angle had to do all the work to tell the story,
yeah.
Because no one was going to narrate it. There was no voiceover, so I think that's when we needed more the storyboard and all the paper.
Exactly, and it was even thinking about the props. How can we subtly
play
get
something
across,
that gives you a story, a backstory.
this kind of backstory. So we created mock newspapers that had headlines about the housing crisis. We had them at a bus shelter that obviously we couldn't put up a poster in the bus shelter because we'd have to go through the council, but we basically mocked it up and then in CGI afterwards put this poster in, which was basically an advert for showing how steep the prices are for people to live in a certain accommodation. I think it was like a 2-bed apartment. But it was down to like certain little kind of subtle details that you probably wouldn't notice first time round, but then like in any film, if you watch it the second time around, you're like, that's there. That makes so much sense.
But even if you don't notice them, it kind of gives you the context of just seeing those stars, seeing those messages, even just give that environment, that full picture that is not just, we didn't just worry about that person, that actor, that performer, but it's the whole thing that we're controlling the whole area, the whole scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the detail is what helps to really enforce that authenticity. Like it's all those little subtle things that you aren't supposed to immediately pick out, but they all kind of subconsciously build that picture and help your brain to tell that story. I think that's key. And I think like if we were to look back at things we've watched that don't feel real or they feel really cheesy, a lot of it is down to the way it's been shot or the lack of quality in the props. You know, any old film now, you can tell in the background like the state of technology at that time and how things have degraded over or improved, and then the old stuff is degraded. So I think detail is really important, but alongside that is pace. How do you manage setting that pace so that you can really communicate those messages, but that it doesn't get boring, that it still feels energetic? Pace is kind of like a silent assassin for good or bad motion.
So, I mean, pace is a tricky one. And 9 times out of 10, it'll be dictated within the edit. So, obviously, from my years of experience, I know how certain pace kind of comes across in terms of how it's digested. More or less in this kind of modern world now, pace needs to be quick. People don't digest stuff as quickly as much as they did 10 years ago, mainly because of the way we're looking at social media has changed so much. So you have
Our attention span
stories,
is so split
you
now.
have TikTok, people have like 15 seconds to be interested in a video. I mean, on Facebook, I think it's like 3 seconds to get people's attention when you're scrolling down for people to carry on watching that video. So in terms of pace, to keep people interested, you have to get to the message straight away. You have to cut quickly, and you have to obviously give enough time that they can read the message and digest the message, but don't linger. The more you linger, the more people will get bored. So pace is so important in this day and age.
And that's the trick in what you do and what we do as creatives, is making sure that message comes across as succinctly as possible without losing any of the meaning or the context behind it. I think
without shouting, without just
without
giving the message, you know what I mean?
Shouting at them.
Exactly. We're still giving a story. We're still trying to say who the brand is, what the company is about, what the personality is about. It's not just about just shouting a message out. So it's very important to find that balance.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, because if it would be easy, everyone would do it, and they wouldn't need a consultancy agency like us.
But that's quite a good point to make, is that when you think in this day and age, it's very much like design or photography, is everyone can create their own content and their own stories. And that is influencing how we as professionals create content for our clients, because we have to start catering to the way that people are, or not start, but continue to understand and create more in the way that people are getting used to creating it. So how do you like balance between creating content in a traditional is not the right word, but we'll use the traditional way versus, like your rough and ready iPhone shoots, because there's a place for all of that content, but how do you balance when to use what kind of technique?
I would say budget is a big one.
Yes.
The readies.
So depending on what the client's playing with.
Yeah.
But I think self-filmed content is more accessible now because of what we've experienced with COVID. So even like your big broadcast productions, like for instance, Ant and Dec's Saturday Night Takeaway, when we went into COVID, they were filming from their house on a webcam.
Yeah.
And just them doing that, like a big broadcast company like ITV, allowing for that, has just changed the way that people like have that perception in terms of quality. So more now. I mean, we've adopted self-recording, we've adopted remote recording. So we'll film people via Zoom, especially for talking head bits, just because if they're 2 hours up the country, we could go and film them like in a really nice quality, but the cost and the time it takes us to go up and do that, it doesn't really weigh up anymore. People are more acceptant to the lower quality, that it just kind of makes sense now in a way.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's in a way it's like you said, like lower quality, but actually it makes it harder because you can't rely on all the bells and whistles. You really have to focus on the content.
So the content is key then. So you have to make sure that the subject that you're kind of portraying is coming across well enough that people will listen. It's almost like a podcast in a way. It's not about the visuals anymore.
Exactly, they forgive the visual because of what they're saying or what that person is actually coming across. Yeah, that's true.
Exactly. Quickly, before we end, I just wanted to ask you guys, obviously in line with what we've been talking about today, what are you watching at the moment, and have you watched anything that's triggered any emotional senses?
I'll tell you what I am watching at the moment is I can't remember the name of it, but it's on Netflix there's a series, an F1 series.
Oh, the Drive to Survive?
Oh my God, it's brilliant.
Is it good?
I've never ever had even an ounce of interest in Formula One. My partner is a mechanic and is a complete gearhead. But considering like I said, have no interest, I am completely hooked. And now I will quite happily sit and watch a Formula One race, or I'll watch highlights of the drivers. The way that has been put together, and it is a mix of like phone content, real interviews, other broadcasters' content. The way it's all put together, and you get to know all of the drivers and the scenarios and the personalities. It just sucks you in. It's brilliant.
Is it building drama around it, like build a story to each kind of driver? Is that how it works? A little bit like all or nothing documentary?
All or nothing, like the football.
Or like the football ones? It's like that?
Yeah, so good.
I find those fascinating because it creates, and not just those ones, but like the reality shows about very weird or obscure, not obscure, but not kind of big productions. Like, they do realities about makeup artists or about people sewing dresses and stuff like that, and they just build the drama all around that, and it gets, if you sit down and watch one, you get hooked very quickly. It's just because of the production, and even if it's a reality show, there's a lot of that, the same work about the storyboard, how it's going to play, how they're going to ask people so they get an answer which is going to create that drama. So it's all fascinating to engage the audience.
The Great Pottery Throwdown is a classic example of that. On paper, you'd be like, that doesn't sound very interesting, but you buy into the characters, and you wouldn't necessarily feel like there is like tension or any anticipation, but because it's a program with challenges and winners, people go home, people, they go through to the next stage, and the personalities and the way it's put together, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
I think we've got to wrap it up now. So thank you all for listening and watching today. I think next episode we're talking about that camera. Next episode we're talking about the power of authenticity, and we have a special guest with us. So
Our first one, very first
Our
one.
very first guest. No
yeah.
pressure.
So please tune in for that one. It's going to be really good. Obviously, if you want to join in with this conversation about any kind of video-related content, drop us a comment in the comment section below, or give us an email on our email address, which, do we remember what it is?
Hello, LoveThat.co.uk.
Yay!
That's the one.
Head of tech, everyone. Head of tech.
.co.uk. But yeah, that's it for this episode. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank
See
you.
you later.